The Grand Hall of the Intergalactic Council shimmered with the glow of 1,000 alien species gathered under one roof. Representatives from across the galaxy mingled, their voices blending into a hum of languages, clicks, and tones. In the middle of it all stood James Carter, a human diplomat from Earth, feeling both out of place and oddly intrigued. Earth's invitation to the Council was a recent development, and James knew how rare this opportunity was. The Council, a powerful body that governed interstellar relations, rarely paid attention to younger species. Humans were seen as newcomers, primitive compared to the advanced civilizations surrounding them. James was scanning the room, trying to stay out of trouble, when he noticed her. She stood near the Council's central podium, her presence commanding attention even among the most decorated delegates. Her deep violet skin seemed to shimmer under the hall's crystalline lights, and her silver hair cascaded down her back like a flowing river. Her attire, a mix of intricate Zelvarian armor and elegant fabric, marked her as royalty. This was Vereda, the heir to the Zelvarian throne, a woman of unmatched grace and beauty. James had heard of her. She was famous for rejecting every suitor who dared propose to her, no matter their wealth or power. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and James quickly looked away, feeling foolish for staring. He knew he had no place in her world. "Excuse me," a soft yet commanding voice said behind him. James turned, startled, and found Vereda standing just a few feet away. She was taller than him, her golden eyes piercing yet curious. "You're the human representative, aren't you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. James nodded, unsure why she was talking to him. Yes, James Carter, from Earth." Her lips curled into a small smile. "I've heard about your species. Bold, unpredictable, and oddly creative." James chuckled nervously. "I'm not sure if that's a compliment." "It is," she replied, her gaze lingering on him. "You saved me earlier. I should thank you." James blinked, confused. "Saved you? I think you've got the wrong person." Vereda shook her head. "No, I don't. You corrected the Tivorian delegate during his speech, didn't you? His mistake could have offended half the council. I doubt he realized it, but I did." James shrugged. "It wasn't a big deal. I just pointed out the error." "To you, perhaps," Vereda said, her voice softening. "But in this hall, small gestures can ripple into much larger consequences." James didn't know what to say. James sat in the bustling cafeteria of the Intergalactic Council building, his plate filled with a mix of alien delicacies he barely recognized. He poked at a glowing blue fruit, unsure whether it was meant to be eaten raw or cooked. Around him, delegates of various species exchanged ideas and negotiated deals, their conversations a blend of laughter, debate, and occasional tension. He still couldn't stop thinking about Vereda. Why had she, out of all the powerful beings in the hall, taken an interest in him? He couldn't shake the memory of her golden eyes fixed on him. "Mind if I join you?" a familiar voice asked. James looked up, startled. Vereda stood before him, a tray in her hands, her violet skin almost luminous under the cafeteria lights. "Of course," James stammered, quickly moving his things to make room for her. She sat gracefully, her presence commanding the attention of nearby tables. Whispers rippled through the room as others noticed the Zelvarian heir choosing to sit with a human. James could feel the weight of their stares, but Vereda seemed completely unbothered. "You don't seem comfortable here," Vereda observed, her voice calm but sharp. James chuckled nervously. "Well, I'm not exactly used to sitting in a room full of beings who could probably vaporize me with a thought." Vereda smiled faintly. "Humans are known for their humor. It's one of the things I find refreshing." James raised an eyebrow. "Refreshing? You mean, compared to all the other species here?" "Yes," Vereda said simply. "Most of them are predictable. Their actions follow patterns, tradition, power, pride. But humans, you act differently, boldly, yet without arrogance. It's intriguing." James hesitated, unsure how to respond. I think that's just because we're new to all this. Maybe we haven't had time to become predictable. Varia tilted her head, studying him. Perhaps, or maybe it's something more. Either way, it's why I'm curious about you. Her words left James momentarily speechless. He wasn't used to being the focus of anyone's attention, let alone someone as important as her. So, James said, trying to shift the focus, why do you think everyone here is so obsessed with impressing you? I mean, you've probably had 100 proposals, right? Varia's smile faded, replaced by a look of mild annoyance. Hundreds, she admitted, but none of them truly saw me. To them, I'm just a title, a prize to be won. They don't care about who I am. And what about you? James asked, his curiosity growing. What do you want? For a moment, Varia seemed caught off guard by the question. She looked at him thoughtfully, as if considering her answer. I want something real, she said finally. Someone who doesn't see me as a prize, but as a person. James nodded, understanding more than he expected to. That doesn't sound unreasonable. Varia's eyes sparkled with something unreadable. We'll see if you mean that, James Carter. The halls of the Intergalactic Council were quieter now, with most delegates attending their private meetings. James strolled through the winding corridors, taking in the grandeur of the place. Intricate carvings and glowing panels decorated the walls, each a tribute to the countless civilizations that had shaped the galaxy's history. He was lost in thought when a sharp voice called out from behind him. Human. James turned to see a tall, imposing Zelvarian man approaching. His silver armor glinted under the soft lights, and his expression was anything but friendly. James instantly recognized him as Keltris, one of Varia's more persistent suitors. Can I help you? James asked, trying to sound calm even though his instincts screamed at him to walk away. Keltris stopped a few steps away, towering over James. You've caught Varia's attention. That's unexpected. James shrugged, trying to downplay the situation. We just talked. Nothing serious. Keltris narrowed his golden eyes. Varia doesn't talk to just anyone, especially not a human. You don't belong in her world. James bristled at the comment but kept his composure. Maybe not, but I wasn't trying to be in her world. She chose to speak to me. Keltris's jaw tightened, clearly unamused. Let me make this clear, human. Varia is destined for greatness. She deserves a partner who can match her strength, her intellect, her status. What could someone like you possibly offer? James hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He knew Keltris wasn't entirely wrong. He was just a small-time diplomat from Earth, but something about the man's arrogance rubbed him the wrong way. I don't know, James said honestly. But if Varia wanted to spend time with me, maybe she's looking for something different. Keltris's glare darkened. You think you're special, that you can win her over by being different. James held his ground. I don't think it's about winning anyone over. Maybe she's tired of people trying to impress her and just wants someone to treat her like a person. Keltris scoffed. Knave, if you think she'll choose you over me, you're a fool. Before James could reply, another voice interrupted. That's enough. Keltris. Both men turned to see Varia approaching, her expression calm but firm. She stepped between them, her gaze locking onto Keltris. James is my guest, she said pointedly. I suggest you show him the respect he deserves. Keltris's face twisted with barely concealed frustration, but he nodded stiffly. As you wish, Varia. With that, he turned and walked away, though not without a final, warning glare at James. Varia turned to James, her expression softening. Are you all right? James nodded, though his heart was still racing. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for stepping in. She smiled faintly. Keltris is persistent, but I can handle him. James chuckled nervously. I noticed. Does this kind of thing happen often? More than I'd like, Varia admitted. But not everyone is brave enough to stand their ground. You are. Her words stayed with James long after she walked away. The journey to Zelveria, Varea's homeworld, was unlike anything James had ever experienced. The ship he boarded was sleek, a mix of advanced alien technology and elegant design. The atmosphere inside was quiet, with soft hums from the engines filling the air, as the stars outside streaked by in vibrant colors. James tried to settle into his seat, but the excitement in his chest made it difficult to relax. He'd been invited to see Zelveria, not as a diplomat, but as someone Varea had chosen to show her world. That thought alone was enough to make him feel like a fish out of water. He was just a human, and Zelveria was a place of immense power and history. What could he possibly offer? As the ship entered Zelveria's atmosphere, the beauty of the planet took his breath away. The sky was a deep shade of purple, and the land below was dotted with glowing cities, all nestled within lush, bioluminescent forests. It looked like a world from a dream, untouched, mysterious, and regal. "Welcome to my home," Varea said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. She had stood beside him, watching as the planet grew larger in the viewports. James looked at her, amazed by her calmness. "It's incredible." Varea smiled. "It is. But it's also more than just beauty. Zelveria carries centuries of history, of struggles, of triumphs. It has shaped everything we are. But sometimes, it also feels like it's too much, too many expectations." James turned to her, sensing a vulnerability he hadn't noticed before. "I get that. I've seen what happens when people are expected to be more than they are." Varea's golden eyes met his, and for a moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. Her position as heir to the Zelverian throne wasn't just a title. It was a burden she carried every day. "I've been groomed for this my entire life," Varea continued. "Every decision I make, every step I take, has been calculated for the good of Zelveria. But no one ever asks what I want. No one ever cares to see who I am beyond the throne." James nodded slowly, finally beginning to understand the weight she bore. "That sounds lonely." "It is," Varea admitted. "I'm surrounded by people, but they see me only for what I represent, not who I am." The ship landed softly in the center of a vast city, and the door opened with a hiss. James followed Varea off the ship, the cool air of Zelveria filling his lungs. The city around them was peaceful, its streets lined with tall, glowing structures that seemed to hum with energy. "You're the first human to ever set foot here," Varea said, leading him through the city. "I want to show you something that no one else has seen." They walked through an ancient garden, where towering trees glowed in shades of green and blue, casting soft shadows on the ground. The garden was peaceful, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Varea stopped at the center, where a large stone statue stood, depicting a Zelverian warrior. "This," she said quietly, "is where the true history of my people begins." James stood beside her, silently taking in the significance of the moment. It was clear that this was a place of great meaning for her, and he couldn't help but feel honored to be included. The evening sun cast long shadows across the Zelverian palace, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. James stood at the edge of a balcony, gazing out over the sprawling city below. The buildings shimmered in the light, their surfaces reflecting the quiet hum of the city's energy. He felt like an outsider, lost in the grandeur of it all. But he was also fascinated by the world Varea had invited him to see. "You look like you're deep in thought." James turned to find Varea standing behind him, her posture graceful, as always. She had changed into a simple but elegant dress, its fabric flowing like liquid silver in the dimming light. "I was just thinking about how different this place is from Earth," James replied, his voice distant. "Everything here feels so ancient, yet advanced at the same time." Varea stepped closer, leaning on the balcony beside him. "Zelveria is a world of contradictions. We have the wisdom of centuries, but we're still learning, still growing. I imagine that comes with a lot of pressure," James said quietly. Everyone expects you to be perfect." Varaya sighed, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "Yes, exactly. But it's more than that. It's about the future of my people. I'm expected to be the one to lead, to make choices that will affect everything. Sometimes it feels like no one cares what I think or want. It's all about what's best for Zelveria." James turned toward her, his expression softening. "That sounds exhausting. You've been carrying the weight of all those expectations alone." "I have," she admitted, "and that's why it's so hard for me to trust anyone. Most people see me as a title, not as a person. But you treat me like I'm more than just an heir. That's why I asked you here." James was taken aback. "You asked me here. But I thought. I wanted to show you my world," Varia interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. "And I wanted to see if there was someone out there who would treat me as I am, not for what I represent." James didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure why he'd earned her trust, or why she seemed so determined to keep him around. But something about her honesty, her vulnerability, made him feel a connection he hadn't expected. Before he could respond, the doors behind them opened, and a figure stepped into the room. It was Keltris, the Zelverian military leader James had met earlier. His expression was cold, his armor gleaming under the palace lights. "Varaya," Keltris said with a slight bow. "The council requests your presence. There are matters to discuss." Varaya's eyes narrowed. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." Keltris didn't move, his gaze lingering on James with barely disguised disdain. "I'm afraid they require your immediate attention, my lady." Varaya's shoulders stiffened. She glanced at James, then back at Keltris. "I'll come when I'm ready, Keltris. This is not your concern." Keltris didn't respond immediately, but the tension in the air was thick. Finally, with a sharp nod, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the grand hall. James watched the interaction carefully. It was clear that Varaya and Keltris had history, and not a good one. Varaya turned to James, her expression hardening. "He's persistent, but I won't let him or anyone else dictate my choices." James nodded, understanding more than he had before. "You're stronger than you think." Varaya smiled faintly, her gaze softening. "Maybe, but it's still hard." She walked away from the balcony, her steps steady but deliberate. James followed her, knowing that whatever came next, he would stand by her side. The next few days on Zelveria were filled with tension and uncertainty. James could feel the weight of the atmosphere shift whenever Keltris was nearby, and he wasn't the only one who noticed. Even the other delegates seemed to keep their distance, as though the presence of the military leader and his intentions for Varaya were no secret. James and Varaya spent their time mostly away from the palace, exploring quiet corners of the city or walking through ancient gardens. Varaya seemed to appreciate the escape, the chance to relax without the constant pressure of her title hanging over her. But there were moments when the weight of her responsibilities came crashing back. James could see it in her eyes when they passed by the city's grand council halls, or when she received messages from her advisors. The smile on her face would fade, replaced by a look of determination mixed with exhaustion. One afternoon, they sat together in the garden near the palace, the soft light of Zelveria's twin moons casting a calming glow over everything. The air smelled of sweet flowers and fresh rain, but there was an unspoken tension between them. "I should go," Varaya said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter than usual. "The council is demanding my attention. There's no way I can avoid it any longer." James looked at her, his concern evident. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." Varaya turned to him, her golden eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "I wish I didn't have to. But I do. This is my duty, James. It's the only thing I've ever known." "You don't have to choose between duty and happiness," James said softly. "It doesn't have to be all or nothing." She smiled faintly, but there was no real joy in it. "You don't understand. The weight of the throne isn't something you can just shrug off. I've been raised for this my whole life. I can't walk away from it, even if I wanted to. James stood up, walking over to her. You're more than just your title, Varia. Don't let them define who you are. You can be both, strong and true to yourself. I know you can. She looked at him for a long moment, as though considering his words carefully. I want to believe that, she said quietly, but I've had so many people tell me what to do, it's hard to see another way. James knelt down beside her, meeting her gaze. Then let me show you. You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here, Varia. Not because of your title, but because of who you are. If you'll let me, I'll stand by you. For the first time in what felt like forever, a real smile spread across her face. It was soft, but genuine, a look of someone who had finally found a bit of peace. I'm not used to people standing by me, she whispered. I know, James replied, but I'm not going anywhere. Varia's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, the tension in her shoulders seemed to lift. She nodded slowly. Maybe I can do this with someone by my side. As they sat there in the garden, the quiet of the night wrapping around them, James couldn't help but feel like something had changed. For the first time, it felt like they were no longer two strangers from different worlds. They were allies, partners in something bigger than both of them. The next morning, things seemed different. There was a new sense of determination in the air, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. James and Varia walked through the palace gardens, the soft sound of their footsteps mingling with the distant hum of the city. The weight of the world seemed to hang on Varia's shoulders, but James could see that something had shifted inside her. She was no longer just the heir to the Zelverian throne. She was a person, and she was ready to take control of her own future. I'm going to confront the council, Varia said suddenly, her voice steady. It's time. James looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. Confront them? What do you mean? Varia stopped walking, turning to face him. I've spent my whole life doing what others expected of me, listening to the council, following orders, never questioning the path laid out for me. But it's my life, James, and I've made up my mind. I can't live for them anymore. James nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. What are you going to do? I'm going to stand before them and tell them the truth, she said firmly. I'm not just a tool to be used for the sake of the Zelverian legacy. I have my own dreams, my own desires, and I won't let them take that from me. James felt a surge of pride for her. She was more than just a royal figure. She was someone who had the strength to fight for herself. He knew this wasn't going to be easy for her, but he also knew it was something she had to do. I'll be there with you, he said quietly, stepping closer. Whatever happens, I'm by your side. Varia's eyes softened as she looked at him. You've always been there for me, James. I don't know what I would have done without you. She reached out and gently touched his arm, a small but meaningful gesture. For a moment, their gazes met, and James felt a spark of something deeper, something that had grown between them over the past few days. He wasn't just standing by her out of duty or out of curiosity. He cared for her deeply. They made their way to the council chambers, the path lined with tall stone columns and shimmering lights. As they approached the large doors, Varia's expression hardened. She was ready for what was about to come. Inside, the council was waiting. The room was vast, filled with alien beings from every corner of the galaxy. Their eyes were all on Varia as she entered, and for a moment, the room was silent. The tension was palpable. Varia stepped forward, standing tall before the council, her voice unwavering. I am the heir to the Zelverian throne, she began, her tone strong and clear. But I am also a person, and I will no longer be treated as a pawn in your game. The council members exchanged glances, murmurs spreading across the room. Some looked shocked, others angry, but Varia stood her ground. I refuse to be forced into a marriage or a life I don't choose, she continued. I will decide my future, and if you cannot accept that, then I will not lead you. James watched from the sidelines, feeling a deep sense of admiration for her courage. This was her moment, her chance to take control of her own destiny. The silence in the council chamber was deafening after Varea's words. For a moment, it seemed like the entire room held its breath, waiting for someone to speak. James stood at the back, his heart pounding. He had never seen Varea so determined, so powerful. This was the moment she had been building up to, the moment she would prove that she wasn't just a figurehead, but a leader in her own right. A council member, a tall being with shimmering blue skin, stood up first. His eyes narrowed as he addressed Varea. "You speak as if your decisions have no consequences, Princess. The future of Zelveria depends on you making the right choices. Your people will not follow you if you abandon the traditions that have held our world together for centuries." Varea stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "I don't intend to abandon anything. But I will not live my life in a cage of expectations. My choices, my future, must be mine." Another council member, a sharp-faced alien with long silver hair, scoffed. "And what of your duty to the throne? What of the alliances we have carefully nurtured with other species? You risk everything with your arrogance." James could see the tension in Varea's body. He knew how much she valued the future of her people, how much she had been taught to put them first. But this was different. This was her future, too. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. "The throne is important," Varea said calmly, "but it's not the only thing that matters. I've spent my whole life preparing to lead, but I never asked to be a tool. I asked to be a person. And I will not lead from a place of fear or obligation. I will lead from a place of strength and choice." The room was still. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes shifting between Varea and James. Keltris, who had been standing off to the side, stepped forward, his armor clanking with every movement. "Do you think you can stand against all of us?" he asked, his voice cold and mocking. "Do you think your human companion can change anything?" Varea's gaze never wavered. "I'm not alone, Keltris. I have the strength to make my own choices, and I have people who believe in me, people who see me for who I am, not for what I represent." James took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice steady but strong. "Varea is right. It's not just about what's best for Zelveria. It's about what's best for everyone, including her. If she's going to lead, she needs to be true to herself, not to your expectations." Keltris stared at him, his expression hardening. "You dare speak like this in the presence of the council? You're a human, an outsider. Your opinion means nothing here." James met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe. But I'm not speaking as an outsider. I'm speaking as someone who knows what it's like to be pushed aside, to be told what to do. No one should live like that, not even a Zelverian princess." The room was tense, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Finally, the elder council member, a creature with deep green skin and sharp, silver eyes, stood up. "Enough," he said, his voice commanding. "Varea has made her decision, and the council will respect that." The words echoed through the chamber, and for the first time, James saw something shift in the council members' faces. Reluctance, yes, but also a grudging respect. Varea had won. She turned to James, a quiet smile on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. James smiled back, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, for her and for them both. The days following Varea's confrontation with the council were tense, but there was a quiet shift in the air. The council members had reluctantly accepted her decision, and for the first time, Varea felt like she was truly in control of her own destiny. She had made her choice, to lead on her own terms, not the terms set by others. James noticed the change in her, the way she carried herself with more confidence, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. There was still the pressure of leadership, of course, but it wasn't the suffocating weight it had been before. Now, Varea had the space to make decisions that truly reflected who she was, not just what she was expected to be. One evening, after a long day of meetings with the council, Varea and James stood on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The twin moons of Zelveria bathed the world in a soft silver light, and the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. "Thank you," Vareya said, her voice quieter than usual, "for standing by me, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." James smiled, leaning against the railing beside her. "You don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work. I just helped you see that you didn't have to face it alone." Vareya turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood me like you do. Most people only see the heir to the throne. They don't see the person." "I know what that feels like," James said softly. "Back on Earth, I've always been told what I should be, what I should do. It's hard to break free from all of that." Vareya nodded, her gaze drifting back to the gardens below. "I'm not just a princess, James. I'm not just someone to be married off or used as a symbol. I'm a person, and I'm going to live my life on my terms." James felt a surge of admiration for her strength. "You're doing it, and you're going to make a great leader. People will follow you because they see who you truly are." She turned back to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "You really believe that?" "I do," he said firmly. "And I'm not just saying that because I'm standing here with you. You've already shown everyone that you're more than just your title. You're more than they ever thought you could be." Vareya's smile widened, and for the first time, James saw the real joy in her eyes. A joy that had been hidden behind the walls of duty and expectation for so long. "I still have a lot to prove," Vareya said, though her voice was full of confidence now. "But I'm ready for it. I know that with people like you by my side, I can do anything." James felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He knew, without a doubt, that he would stand by her, no matter what challenges lay ahead. They had come this far together, and he had no intention of walking away. As the night stretched on, the sound of soft laughter echoed in the quiet garden. It was the sound of two people who had found not only strength in each other, but also a deep connection, a bond that neither the council nor anyone else could break. Weeks passed since Vareya's bold stand against the council. Her decision to take control of her future had shaken the foundation of Zelverian politics, but it had also brought about change. The council, while still uneasy, had started to adapt to the idea of a leader who would not simply follow tradition, but shape her own destiny. Vareya's strength and determination were now more than just words. They had become the foundation of her leadership. The people of Zelveria, once uncertain about the young heir, began to see the spark within her. Slowly, trust was built, not because of her title, but because of who she was. James had been with her every step of the way. In the quiet moments, when the weight of leadership threatened to pull her down, he was there to offer support. In the public moments, when the pressure of being heir was overwhelming, he was the steady presence by her side, grounding her in the truth that she was not alone. One evening, as the sun set over the Zelverian horizon, Vareya stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the vast landscape. The city stretched out below, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. She had come to this spot many times before, but tonight felt different. She wasn't just standing here as the heir to the throne. She was standing here as a leader, as a woman who had finally found her own path. James joined her, his footsteps soft on the ground. He had grown used to these moments with her, quiet, reflective, and full of unspoken understanding. He stood beside her, looking out over the view. "You know," Vareya said after a long silence, "I never thought it would feel like this. Free, I mean." James smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I can't imagine what it must have been like to live your whole life under such pressure." Vareya's lips curled into a small smile. "It wasn't easy, but I've learned that sometimes the greatest pressure is the one we place on ourselves. We're always trying to live up to expectations, but at some point, we have to let go and be who we truly are." James looked at her, his heart swelling with admiration. "And you're doing that now. You've already proven you're more than just a princess. You're a leader, Vareya. People see that now." She glanced at him, her expression softening. "I never could have done this without you, James. You were the first person who treated me like a person, not a symbol. You gave me the courage to be myself." James felt a warmth spread through him at her words. "You had the courage all along. I just helped you see it." Varya turned toward him fully, her golden eyes meeting his with a depth of emotion he hadn't expected. "I'm glad you're here with me. Not just because you're a human, or because you're from Earth, but because you're you." James reached out, his hand gently brushing hers. "And I'm glad you're here, Varya. I wouldn't be anywhere else." They stood there together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the soft breeze of Zelveria's evening air stirring around them. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer just two strangers from different worlds. They were partners, bound by a shared belief that true leadership came from within, and that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the stars began to appear in the sky above, Varya and James knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side.